Okay, good morning everybody. It's 10 o'clock. We're not quorate at the moment. We need another one to make us quorate. So fingers crossed we are joined by at least another one colleague. Vera?
I was just agreeing with fingers crossed.
So welcome to today's Transport Scrutiny meeting. We've got Dan Essex joining us on Teams. And if we just do a quick whiz around the room for introductions, please. So if we start over there.
Councillor Vera Waters, Walsall Council, Russell Sheffield Ward.
Councillor Karen Sims, Sandbrook Council, Friar Park Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Chairman Lal, Birmingham City Council, Sohon Julicota Ward, Vice Chair of the Transport Subcommittee of the Combined Authority.
Councillor Cathy Baton representing ABCA and a Dudley MBC member.
Lindsay Roberts, Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority.
Richard Warren, Walsall Council, Chair, West Midlands Transport Delivery Committee.
Pete Bond, Transport for West Midlands, Director of Integrated Transport Services. Good morning.
John Hayes, Head of Bus, TFWM.
Kate Taylor, Head of Finance, Business Partnering and Strategic Planning, Combined Authority.
Is it me? Dan Essex, Governance Services Manager at the Combined Authority.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, so if we move on then to apologies for absence, Lindsay.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Singh.
Thank you. And the usual declarations of interests. Any declarations of interests, members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable prejudicial interests they have in any item being discussed, and in addition, any receipt of gift or hospitality. Do I have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, thank you. I don't have any particular remarks for today's meeting other than to welcome Councillor Richard Worrell, who kindly agreed to come along, particularly for item 7 as chair of TDC, TDC, so that he can report on the report that went to TDC and the decision-making process around that. So thanks very much for coming along today, Richard. We have 2 sets of meetings to take. We can't approve them because we're not quorate, but if I can take them for matters of accuracy and matters arising, please, and then we'll have to approve them at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. So if we take minutes of Thursday, the 8th of September, agenda item 4, I'll take them for accuracy first, page 1, 2, 3 and 4. Happy that they're accurate? And do we have any matters arising from those? No, nothing at all. Okay, lovely, thank you very much. And then that moves us on to the Transport Scrutiny Subcommittee minutes of the 13th of October. Again, matters about accuracy, page 5, 6, 7 and 8.
I haven't got them in front of me. I've read them, honest. You know what I'm like. Fine too.
Okay, so item 79 then. So any matters arising from those? Okay.
The only thing is that we have the lead, transport lead for the West Command Authority, Councillor Ian Ward here, and the couple of issues which we just want to follow up with him, particularly my question about the inquiry into the repeated long failure of the Midland Metro last year, and I come across some minutes of the TDC where they say that the mayor of the Combined Authority and the street was going to have a public inquiry, and we are supposed to follow it up, and I'd like to know where we are with that.
Thank you, Councillor Lyle. So Once these minutes are approved, unfortunately, because we're not caught up, we can't approve them until the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which meets in December. Once those have been approved, we will be writing formally to Council Award and requesting a formal response. I can advise that a member of the public has put in a freedom of information request in relation to that particular issue around the inquiry or having the report being released into the public domain. So that is in the system. Vera?
When we had the questions to Ian Ward, he actually mentioned that there's certain places that the bus lanes have been taken away. They're no longer there. And I actually know where one of them is now, and it's the route that I actually take. And when the question needs to be asked is when it's going to be reinstated, because it is causing traffic to be late, and particularly buses to be late.
Because I think that particular item is an operational
Yeah.
issue. So I think we'd have to pick that up through the operational processes. The whole, the bigger picture about the removal of bus lanes and the impact, I think is a perfectly legitimate question to ask. But if you want to pick up the specific through operational.
No general.
General.
Don't pick up the general, it's one of them.
Right. Just also on the minutes, if I can just make mention of the fact that in his absence, Councillor McCarthy had proposed a number of items of business to come forward for consideration by the Transport Scrutiny Committee as part of the work programme. Lindsay had a conversation with Anne Shaw about the items to look at which were the responsibility of TDC and which were the responsibility of Transport Scrutiny. The only one that came out that was the responsibility for Transport Scrutiny was the local transport plan, and that will come to January's meeting. So that was followed up. So that moves us on then to item 6, the bus service improvement plan, pages 9 to 182. And I'll pass over to Pete Bond.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up on the previous point as well, if you wish us to take away any question around individual bus lane, then John and myself can do that. And I was also just going to say we will be joined by a member of my team, Steve Hayes, as well, who's coming by train today. So and here he is right on the bell. So if members would be okay if I took you through the presentation, which is designed to be, I know it's already been circulated, it's designed to be a background piece around this, and are you okay if I go and plug in and undertake this at that end of the room? Lindsay tells me it's simple, but I technological tasks look very complicated.
While Pete's getting set up, committee are asked to note and endorse the bus service improvement plan report. Thank you.
Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Actually feel like that's my day done, and I'm normally the biggest failure when it comes to these ones. Okay, so thank you and good morning. As I said, Pete Bond, Director of Integrated Transport Services, and Steve within the team supports on the BSIP and the BSIP and network transformation, and John on all of the operations and the network. So obviously I know that there will be questions from this, and this pack has been circulated, but I was hoping to make sure that I gave an overview and a really good sort of structured dialogue around the background to some of the complex decision makings, I suppose, that have needed to go on in recent months. This first slide in terms of background sets out around the recovery of bus patronage, which in this region is currently about 86 to 88% of pre-pandemic levels. And one of the issues we have with bus patronage recovery is the passengers that haven't yet returned don't not return in a nice geographical location where you can identify services right across the board and it's spread. So that has an impact. But within that, there's a couple of important factors, which are that commercial patronage is actually returning much better than the concessionary travel. So numbers of people who are paying for their journeys are returning at a greater number and are returning at different times. What we've seen is that recovery at weekends be very or almost aligned to pre-pandemic levels, whereas Mondays to Fridays it isn't. And there's obviously different things within that time as well. But for concessionary pass holders, we've struggled to get that past 70% of pre-pandemic levels as well. But the costs of operating services, if I just purely look at the commercials of this, are around about 120% of pre-pandemic levels. That's including fuel and driver pay, but that's set to increase further because of the wider inflationary challenges that we see going on around us. Government throughout the pandemic has been making payments to support both operators and local transport authorities to procure additional services, and that commenced in 2020 through the COVID grants. There's been a series of different types of grants that have paid for that and supported it, but we are now awaiting clarification for any future funding, because at the minute there is some money left for January to March 2023. We didn't know that was happening when we embarked on a network review, but we now do. That money will be passed to Transport for West Midlands to work with the operators to try and get the best value out of it. But at the moment, as it stands, on the 1st of April 2023, government funding for bus services, which has been relied on, will stop across the country. Now, that has been said before, and we've got to the 11th hour and then more funding has been found. So it's not to say that there won't be a change in that space, but government intention at the moment is that there is going to be no further funding after that date. And there is also an intention by the government to introduce a £2 fare cap from January the 1st to March the 31st. We understand we've got there awaiting clarification when this pack was sent out. We have had some more clarification from government in the last week. That this will be paid directly to operators and is being agreed with them. In some instances, it will be paid through local authorities where there are services that only run on tenders. But in our case, all of our operators, we believe, qualified to negotiate directly with government. We have our own concerns around that, even though it sounds really good, bus fares are coming down. It's only for a 3-month period. So actually what we've asked the government is, how are you promoting this? Is it like when we think back to COVID, a Rishi Sunak help out to eat out style approach to tell people this is a temporary reduction? Or are people going to wake up thinking their bus services all over England have come down to £2? And what happens on April the 1st when they go back up to whatever they were before? In the West Midlands, it impacts us a bit less because a lot of our fares at £2, £32.40 respectively in different parts of the conurbation are not that significantly different to the £2. But when you look at some of our cross-boundary services, for example, that come from Warwickshire, where single tickets can be typically £4, £4.50 and above, then that makes a heck of a difference to people's journeys. So the messaging around that is really, really important. And I've said there, we are talking to government about what funding might be available beyond March 2023. There is no clarification, but we think it's really important. Not just this has been highlighted through Transport Delivery Committee, but also through the West Midlands Bus Alliance Board, which consists of operators and is also independently chaired by Transport Focus, to gain some traction. So this is a really, really important conversation. So the regional position for us is that the government set out in the funding that they provide to us that as the West Midlands, we have to review our network with the commercial operators to be able to re-evaluate what the network looks like, to take into account the changes of patronage and various factors since COVID. That was a statement that was conditional on us getting money. So we had to agree to that. And we agreed that that would take place on the 1st of January 2023. The fortunate thing for this region is the reason we were able to push it back to that date is we had a commitment of funding in 2022 that surrounded the Commonwealth Games. And we were uniquely funded to support that. And as it happens, gradually the rest of the country caught up because the government kept issuing extra 3 months of subsidy support. But where we benefited greatly was the fact that we introduced that earlier and we were able to predict outwards for 7 or 8 months. Whereas in other parts of the country, when the government came to the table with funding, that was literally days or weeks before the changes were due to take place. In some parts of the country, the network changes had already been implemented, drivers had already been let go, services had already changed, etc. So in this region, National Express, our major operator, committed to a 90% service from January 2023. Compared to what we currently operate, that's a reduction of 3.7% of mileage in the West Midlands. So it's not an increase, it's not growth, it is a reduction. So we're trying to factor that into our messaging. This isn't all about hope and optimism. This is actually a message that is going to see some people without a bus service. Diamond had also made some changes. Has a company called Select Bus who operate between Wolverhampton and Staffordshire. But again, ongoing negotiations just in recent days, we've managed to deal with some of those impacts. But the tendered network, and this is the really important part as well for us, needed to respond to the commercial proposals through our access standards. And our access standards had a value for money criteria, which was £2.55 per passenger. But because of all of the increased costs associated with COVID, all of a sudden, a lot of our contracts are coming in at much higher than that. So a proposal was taken to Transport Delivery Committee to adjust not the policy of the access standards, but the value for money criteria within it to £4.10, which would enable us to fully utilise the budget that was available to support access standards. Thereby, we think, and I'll come to this, saving around 30 to 40 bus routes. As a network review itself, commercial operators have registered their changes at the end of September, and they've included some impacts across the region. In Dudley, there are some bus route changes, several affected. We've been able to manage and mitigate the vast majority of those through the tender network, but all of a sudden now these are going on to the cost of the public purse, not the private sector. The QE Hospital in Birmingham, there's some reductions in services there, but again, we've managed to mitigate some, but not all of that. And some changes to services in Solihull that have been deregistered. Again, we have been able to step in and support some of those through a combination of tendered and VSIP funding. And it says here school services, NXWM deregistered around 15 of 60 school services they operate. Again, this was done last week, but we now have a revised position on that a lot of those services have been reinstated. Not all, but around 50% have been reinstated, and around the remaining 50%, we are waiting on clarity as to what the impacts are around each individual school. So if there's anything else that needs to be mitigated as well. And I've already mentioned Diamond Bus and Select Bus commercial changes, but the overall changes represent about 4% of miles. But just to highlight, a review of this scale would normally be around 6 to 9 months planning. In this instance, we've had 6 to 8 weeks to deal with this. And the timescale should have been, and this is even still a condensed timescale, that we agree the network with the operators on August the 31st. We engage with members and stakeholders through September. We registered the services in October, and the network commences in January. Whereas what actually happened was we received indications of services from operators during October. So we've had to work with operators to agree what changes there are, then undertake engagement with members through drop-in sessions across all 7 local authorities, provide route by route updates, which we're still trying to get onto the website now because there's still clarifications of tenders going out, and work with local authorities and operators to try and deal with the school service changes. Again, still for the network commencing on the 1st of January. So this has created a massive pressure on tendered bus services. Commercial changes have created about £3 million pressure on subsidised buses. So if you get value for money criteria for a minute and say, actually, how much would it cost to replace everything? That creates an extra £3 million pressure just from the commercial reductions. But then the increased costs of providing tendered services as well is creating a further pressure on those existing ones. So it overall created a £6 million increased requirement on tendered bus services, £1 million of which was already catered for because we got an increase in the budget. So leaving with a £5 million black hole, if you like. So of those 116 contracts due to expire up for renewal. 59 were within the value for money. 57 contracts were outside of the value for money criteria, that £2.55. So continuing without adapting the value for money criteria could have saved the combined authority £3.25 million. So if we simply said, stick to the process that exists, and so actually would have solved some of the budget woes of the Transport Authority. But what we were looking at was a question about utilising the full 16.3 million to deliver as many of those bus services as possible, which is where it took us to this £4.10 criteria, and pulled a lot of the at-risk services back into standards to be able to provide. So this was because the impact of those existing services. We knew a lot of these. 29 routes were Monday to Saturday daytimes, 12 evenings and Sundays. We selected 850 bus stops where no other bus services provided a service. So actually another 850 bus stops out of the estate would have fallen out of use. Carry 158,000 passengers a week, which is 8.2 million journeys a year. And just a reminder, that's more passengers than Moore Street Station in Birmingham. It's a significant chunk. And the biggest impacts there were affected were Birmingham, Walsall and Dudley, but also that impact around hospital services and the fact that a lot of communities would be left without daytime services provided. So TDC were presented with two options. Option one was to leave the value for money criteria and in effect make that saving and create those impacts. Or option two, amend the access standards on the value for money to £4.10, bringing those extra contracts into scope and reducing that impact significantly and contract exposure. But what we were clear on was that even though we could do that, we would still, this was a combination of increasing the value for money, but we were also utilising some funding out of bus service improvement plan to bring some other services back into the fold. We had some remaining local transport funding from government to utilise, and then reviewing the contracts for efficiency. So that has meant that rather than those 57 contracts at risk, we've ended up with somewhere between 7 and 17 services that will no longer operate from that time. So I think I've just really set out, but that's a policy requirement and the value criteria within the policy. School services I've spoken about, but it was in the pack. But I think the key point here from a policy perspective to remember is that whilst those services were going to be taken away, and even though there is a reversal on a lot of those decisions now, the replacement of those is not supported under Combined Authority access standards, because actually what we're not able to do, there is no either funding or policy to support additional school services through the tendered bus budget or anything else. That normally falls back to local authorities to make a provision. So we were highlighting there to local authorities, here's a concern coming down the track. And actually, since although National Express had told us they weren't going to overturn that decision, but National Express came before Transport Delivery Committee a week, Monday just gone, and on the back of that discussion with Delivery Committee members, they went away and overturned their decisions on 50% of them, and we await clarity on the rest. The fact also highlights around partnership services. This is a really important issue because these are commercial bus services. So these are routes where 2 or more operators compete on one service. So service 50 in Birmingham is an example, and service 16 here. We've got services operating through Dudley in the Black Country, Walsall with Diamond Bus and National Express competing on service routes, certain routes, and Stagecoach in Coventry. But this opportunity for us is about saying, given the challenges of resource and the challenges of service and service miles and the threats to bus service, would we be better facilitating as a transport authority better combined use of the routes and services and also the headway and ticketing? And that's where John and the team have been working very closely with all of the operators concerned to try and negotiate an agreement in that space. I have to say, a huge amount of progress has been made. It's one of the most frustrating tasks that we've ever had to undertake. It has probably taken upwards of hundreds and hundreds of man hours to facilitate negotiations, because what you're trying to do is get an agreement where a major operator is trying to protect its network and smaller operators are trying to encroach on that network. And actually neither really wants to necessarily concede ground in a natural space. There have been agreements and there have been breakthroughs, and we have got to a positive place. That's not an easy task or an easy road, but actually it's really important because the level of resource that could save, we think, is upwards of 40 buses in the region, and could also save a lot of drivers at this time. Just want to highlight the wider considerations and risks in this space. So this hasn't just been about those bus services. Whatever agreement is reached, there are still challenges to us that, as we stand here today, we're not guaranteed to receive or be able to put out tenders for all of the services that we have put out as tendered routes. Now, actually, although the slight update is we think we have had a tender back for every service that we've put out. There are still a few exceptions that was still last minute that we've got to try and fill. And there are some commercial routes that National Express have brought forward in the last week to tell us that they will not be operating from January the 1st. And that doesn't give us any time to mobilise anything to replace that or do anything about it. So we have some concerns in that space. So having a tender and the money doesn't necessarily mean we've got a bus and a driver on January the 1st, 2023. And that's partly driven by the driver shortages. We know that the driver shortage level is around 220 across the West Midlands right now. That number changes, it goes up and down depending on which operator or which bus driver you talk to. But ultimately, we know that there are more than 200 bus driver vacancies that need to be filled in this region, and that is significant. Bus company capacity is also important. We've lost 5 bus operators through COVID and since the start of COVID, where they've either been bought out or they have merged. So competition has dwindled significantly, but we operate a deregulated competitive market. So without competition, how does it flourish? That is one of our key and critical challenges. And service performance, the West Midlands is facing challenging performance from operators, and the customer experience is poorer than most people are used to seeing and experiencing through reliability, punctuality and information. There are measures that we're trying to undertake. There are measures within BSIP. There are discussions that we've got ongoing with government around driver shortages. There's proposals around the information, but a lot of those are not overnight fixes. And it doesn't take account, once we've done all of these things, this doesn't take account of any further commercial reductions by operators during 2023, because we've now maxed out our budget. So any further withdrawals from the network are a challenge. But on the plus side, what it doesn't take account of is if there is any additional government funding, what that will do. We've had a comms plan around this, which is self-explanatory and sets out, I thought, absolutely helpful from the scrutiny perspective to see who we've talked to and where, and how we followed up on those agreements. And there is a challenge in this space that we will openly admit to, and that is because of those timescales we talked about. If we've got 6 to 9 months to do a network at this scale, we would set out a comms plan that looks very different to one that we're doing in 6 to 8 weeks. So it's not helped by that. But what we have tried to do is make sure that we've had as much engagement activity as we are able to take to the small team of people that we've got working on this in the comms team. This talks about the situation as it was last week when we shared the pack, but we're still assessing the elements of contract removal that we can mitigate. We're virtually there with that. We will know by the end of tomorrow what services can no longer operate as of January the 1st, 2023, and we will be setting out a communications channel to start to put that out. We're conscious that this isn't good news for lots of people, because actually we're going out to tell some people you haven't got a bus service from January the 1st, 2023. So what we're trying to focus on is what are their alternatives, what are their options, what have we been able to do to try and support the best and most amount of people that we can, and how can we make sure that we're engaging as far and wide as we can in this space as well. Coming just to the close, the latest developments in this space. So these are the things that have really happened in the last weeks. Whilst National Express committed to a 90% network, we don't know if all the operators can fulfil this due to the driver shortage that we've talked about. But we are talking to other operators as well. about what are you doing to expand in this space? How can you help? We're talking to the Combined Authority from skills and regeneration, additional driver training programs, for example, and encouraging growth. We are attending a session with government next Tuesday, an emergency meeting around bus driver shortages with bus operators and the Confederation of Passenger Transport and 2 or 3 local transport authorities, of which we asked to be one of them. Talked about the lack of competition, but this can have a massive impact on services. And of course, I've also talked about government funding, but the key issue here is that National Express have advised us that their 90% network is not commercial. Even though that's the network we're going with from the 1st of January 2023, that's not wholly commercial. And unless the government can support additional funding during 2023, a further 8% of our network could be lost in mid to late 2023. So those conversations with government and the aspirations for funding are absolutely essential. But what this is telling us is what we thought was a commercially viable network as of January the 1st is not. And actually, I think this is probably symptomatic of some of the challenges that we have around how commercial bus services are around the country post-COVID and the implications of that. So, Chair, I hope, and members, I hope that was a helpful and useful overview to bring it to life. But happy to pick up the questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Pete, for your presentation. I'll throw it open to members to ask questions. I've got some that I'd like to put to you, but I'll leave mine until other members have spoken. Councillor Waters.
Background latest network, the first page. Patronage on buses is 86 to 88%. Now, I assume this was done by surveys to actually find out the actual facts and figures. And as for concessionary passes not being used as much, my own experience, because I use buses every single day, is that they are being started, our older generation and vulnerable people who actually use the concessionary passes are starting to come out more than what they did. Now, my suggestion on this would be, could there be another survey done to actually get the facts and figures as they stand now? Because I believe there wasn't really one done in Walsall. I know there was one done in West Brom, Wolverhampton, Birmingham, and maybe Dudley, I'm not sure. But I know there was not one done in Walsall. And what I'm actually seeing, the footfall has improved a great deal.
I'll take that, Chair, if that's okay. So yeah, so the data we get comes through the ticket machines from the bus operators. So they record every trip that is undertaken on their vehicles and the ticket type that is presented at the time of travel through a data sharing agreement that we've got with all the bus operators, National Express included. We're then able to disaggregate that between those that are commercial and those that are paying those that are using a disabled and older person's bus pass. So we've got that. We understand every trip that is taken, and we know where those passengers are boarding as well. So we've got a really rich source of information to inform not only the patronage levels, but the ticket types that are being purchased and used.
Can I come back, Chair? Now, you say you know where they actually board the bus. The thing that always gets me is, now, on certain routes, there's no way of showing where that person gets off. Now, I'm going to use the 7 Walsall Castleford as an example. Now, what happens is people will actually, they put an extra bus on 7E that just goes from Walsall to Aldridge, and it only runs during peak time, basically, for school children and things like that. Now, what happens is people will get the 7E into Aldridge, then they'll get off there and wait for the 937 to continue their journey. So at times that looks as though the 7 which goes to Castleford isn't being used, because they'll actually jump on that because sometimes they're late, there's the driver shortage, there's no drivers, and it works out as the patronage on the 937 in some days actually goes up because of the seven not being there, not being there. So people, and the number 6 as well, where actually goes Walsall to Sutton Coldfield. People will jump on another bus to get into Aldridge and so forth. So it's you know, it's sort of a, what's the name? It's you've got to be out on the ground to actually see what's going on this.
Yeah, so there is an element of monitoring that we do as well on the ground. So I think you referred to some surveys that are undertaken on the ground that you will have seen. So we do something called cordon surveys, where actually we'll cordon off a commercial centre and we'll count all the people by all the modes that are coming in. So rail, bus, car, cycle, walking, and what services they're using. So we use that information then to inform the sort of the modal flows between. We also use the sort of the aforementioned patronage data, if you like, to then model movements as well. So whilst we don't necessarily record when people get off, we do understand from their return journeys where they're boarding, and therefore we can sort of backward manufacture, if you like, what we believe people's travel patterns are. So as best we can, we're collecting the information through that, and we also get quite a lot of intelligence from the bus operators, who obviously know their flows really well, and where people are travelling from and to, and how they might be transferring between services if you know, like between the 7 and the 937, if they're moving between services, they understand that and they can reflect that. So as best we can, when we're undertaking network reviews in particular, we use that information and that data to then inform how we map the network and how we take it forward. As Pete referenced in the presentation, it's been slightly different this time because of the time constraints and the emphasis on the commerciality of the network. But we will be taking and do take that into account as we remap the network and think about the future plan.
We've got Councillor McCarthy, who's joined us online, indicating. Martin?
Yeah, just adding to the previous question. I take it that the data just comes from on-the-day issued purchase tickets and not the use of passes, concessions and all the rest of it. And do you know generally what proportion of service use generally across the network, or it may vary by routes, that passes account for? Because they're not included in that data, are they?
Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, the every time somebody presents a pass, uses cash, uses their contactless card, uses an app, uses a travel pass, that's all recorded on the ticket machine, so we know how a person is travelling.
Including post-65 ones?
Yes, including the ENCs, most importantly the ENCs, because then we use that data to calculate the level of reimbursement that we provide to the bus operators.
Do we actually hold any business efficiency reviews with them to see how they're actually spending their money? Are they running efficiently? Because having worked for a large purchasing organisation in the past, this was something that we did from time to time when we had issues like this, to find some common ground. It did tend to work quite well.
Business efficiency reviews with the operators, Councillor.
Yeah.
Yes, so in effect, I suppose, in some respects, if you look at this whole network review process, it's a large scale business efficiency review, because what we've been trying to do is work collaboratively with the operators to get the best outcomes from what is the fact that they are reducing miles out. So if you look at some of the tendered services that we've put forward, then they don't necessarily mirror the commercial routes that have been taken away, because we might have made some changes for effective route planning or efficiencies, or combining 2 routes into one, or adding something onto the end. And also what we are looking at is, once the network review is in place, looking at some of the promotional activities that could be undertaken. We think that needs to be done once we've got an improvement in the driver situation, for example, though. But some promotional activities to try and encourage. Councillor Waters talked about the fact that there are numbers of people that are now coming back to the network in the concessionary travel market, but how can we encourage more? How can we promote the service in the new network as it's available? So there are some opportunities to continue to do that, but we do undertake that process as part of this, and it has had to be collaborative. That was the government condition on receiving the funding also.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lowe.
Thank you, Steve. Going back to Councillor Woods' question, the partners. When we carry out the data of partners, do we look at other factors, such as some people are still working from home, the cost of employees, people are spending less, but going less out to shopping purposes. So these factors need to be taken into account. If we can't just rely on the just purely statistics of current factors, because he's not giving us a true picture of what's the need of the transport case, which could change after the other underlying factors have been removed or are no longer there. So it may be giving us the wrong information. So we need to take that into account. A couple of other things on the communication side. I looked at that on it's supposed to be Birmingham Scrutiny should be getting the information. But I've been here Birmingham Scrutiny, I haven't had anybody contact me if that should be on my agenda. So aren't we already if now we're in November now? So if myself haven't been asked to look at that in my committee. So I don't know how are we going to make sure that our communication planning will work. And so I got. Do you want to answer the question, or shall I go to other?
Carry on, Councillor.
Yeah. On while I welcome the TDC's option 2 proposals, what would the long-term impact would be on the Transport West Midlands budget, or what, or will it cause us some problems if you don't get any additional funding from government? Would that give some issues later on? So while it's good that we are protecting some of the at risk bus routes now, but will it bring some problems later on the line? On the driver sorting, it's not the it's just understandable as about driver sorting. But we had similar problem with the HGV drivers and all waste refugee collection service. Also, were local authority, they were also impacted by the shortage of HGV drivers. And what we done is we trained everybody in that service to be heavy goods vehicle driver. So if you suddenly lost some driver, then other people can step in. So what I know the National Express trying to recruit more drivers, but at the same time, are they doing something similar? Everybody working in the Express should be trained up to be a bus driver, so that in emergencies, rather than lose services, they can get the backup or the on staff. They can step in. Thank you.
Can I ask John to pick up that? But I think, Richard, were you indicating that you'd also like to respond to one of Councillor Lowell's points?
I think I could do it
Yes.
later.
Okay.
I've collected 1 or 2 points.
Okay, lovely. John?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So just on your first point around the survey, so you're absolutely right. So that the patronage information tells us what's going on. What we don't know, though, is the lifestyle changes that have led to that change. So we've got our own data collection team here and market research team. So we support the trend data, if you like, with those lifestyle type surveys to understand why is that data showing what it's changing. You're absolutely right. So things like working from home, people working more agilely, cost of living, meaning that people aren't going out as much to spend money. On the positive, cost of living means that people can't necessarily afford to run a car anymore, or can't afford some of the parking charges where they're going to, etc., etc. So that is driving some people towards using the bus. So you're absolutely right. The important thing is then to understand why people are then making the decisions that they're making. That means either they're not travelling or they're new travellers on the network, etc., etc. So we are doing all of that. We also record passenger satisfaction as well, so that we're understanding exactly how people. How satisfied people are when they do use the bus, and that's important to us because we want to make sure, you know, if we've got a new customer that's coming to us, that they're satisfied and that we can retain them for future travel. So you're absolutely right. We do need to do that, and we do it and report on it. In terms of the school communication, as Pete said, very much one for National Express. You know, it's their commercial decisions around what they were doing with schools, and we have actively encouraged and asked them to be proactive in their communications with schools and local authorities. I think most of the councillors here were on the calls with me where I presented some of this to the local authorities around that, and you know, I suspect that was the first time any of you had heard the information around the schools, and that's not right. This was a commercial decision for National Express. They made that decision, and they should have been communicating that with the schools and the local authorities to say, we've got an issue here, we're looking at it, but just so you're aware, here's some services that we are thinking about removing. And that's what we did. We told the councillors these are the services that are potentially at risk. As Peter said, we told you the worst case scenario, and now we're able to come back with some better news to say some of these services will be retained, but please, there are some risks around these that remain, and some will go. We'd ask National Express to do the same. I'm not going to defend the way that they approached it, but I suppose now that they're looking at it through pressure from ourselves, from TDC, from some of the schools that are aware, and they've obviously started to row back on some of those decisions, and now they're in a place to be able to confirm exactly what's going on. And they have committed now to write to schools and parents and passengers that are informed. But yeah, we would not condone the approach that National Express have taken, and we've been quite firm and clear with them in that. I'll leave the question on funding to Pete for TDC wider funding. Just on driver shortages, so there's an awful lot going on in that space. It's been, but there was a good discussion and airing at the Bus Alliance earlier in the week about what we are going to do about it. And a subgroup of the Bus Alliance actually met on Monday, and that was representations from TFWM, bus operators, and the Combined Authority Education and Skills team about how we might be able to encourage more drivers into the industry. We see that as being threefold, really. The short-term measures to try and encourage drivers back in and address the sort of the reliability issues that we've got here and now. There's the medium term about attracting potentially, you know, HGV drivers or people that are long-term unemployed to become bus drivers. And then there's the real long-term about how do we make bus driving an attractive choice of career, you know, and things like getting a double-deck vehicle into a primary school and letting the kids crawl over it, taking a diesel engine into an engineering course at a college and letting them pull that apart and work with bus operators and engineers and offering apprenticeships and that sort of thing. So trying to break all of that down. It's very much a national and international issue, and driver shortages, all bus operators are affected by it right across Europe. I was chatting to us with our European colleagues, and they're all advertising and talking about the same issues that we're tackling. And the DFT have called a summit on the 29th of November that Pete's attending, along with other city regions and representation from DFT and government about what we can do about it. In terms of your comments around refuse drivers and Birmingham City Council training up the entire crew to have a HGV licence, obviously bus is a single crew, so if the driver's not there, he can't drive it. However, National Express and all of the bus operators do train their office staff, and they are out, and their engineering staff, and they are out driving. And we've heard this week actually that the managing director for Diamond Bus has been out driving buses because they don't want to lose the mileage, and many of the office staff within National Express are driving as well as and when it's needed. They've also got other staff that are operational non-driving, so people like the revenue protection teams, the inspector teams and that sort of thing. So they're out driving as well as is required. And I think the school services after the 1st of January will be crewed by that sort of staff because they just haven't got the sort of the people that are employed to be drivers to operate.
I'll just pick up on the funding point. When that decision was taken, I know that a Transport Delivery Committee were providing with some very clear and robust financial information to support that. So around the implications of the decision on both current year, but also on future years funding. But what is anticipated to happen is that although we have, through COVID, we've been extending contracts to go. So all contracts that would have expired in 2020, because the government funding that was provided, then they were just extended on rolling sort of 6-month periods. Same happened in 2021 and then on 2022. So we have this position where I don't think we've ever had a tender round since 1986, where we've had 116 contracts up for renewal. So it is our biggest tender round in history that's come forward. But then there will be a significant number of further tenders that come up for renewal in 2023, 2024, 2025, so on and so forth. So actually the financial planning around the current decision making also identified that for future years risks that will probably have more of an impact and implication for the letting of those further contracts that come up for renewal during those time periods. So the Transport Delivery Committee was taking the knowledge that they weren't providing an exposure to the Combined Authority funding that couldn't be managed. But at the same time, of course, it's also worth noting that as we've gone through each phase of this through COVID, this point where I recall government told us for the first period through COVID that this was going to be 6 months of funding and there would be no more. And then there was another 6 months of funding, but there would be no more. And then that's gone on and so on and so forth to March 2023. So that could yet be partly managed or mitigated through that option as well. But we are future proofed if it doesn't.
Okay, the other question is on where we have situation on the popular commercial routes. We have the passenger chase, bus chase, comedy chasing, competing for each other's passengers. Is there any rule we have, regulation we have? I mean, try the voluntary agreement with them, it's not working, they won't give way to each other. Is there any rules regulation to say somehow we can make each of the operators, go and distribute themselves on other routes rather than spending more of their resources on very commercially lucrative routes, leaving the other routes without the proper service? Is there any rules that we can use of?
Yeah, and we're actively exploring that as well, Councillor. So under the 2017 Bus Services Act, there is legislation in there around the enhanced partnership. And within that, you can include something called maximum frequencies along the corridor. So you can say to an operator, on this route, we will allow a maximum of 20 buses an hour. Then it's up to the operators that are competing on that corridor to agree between themselves how that 20 vehicles will be made up. If they can't reach agreement, then it comes over to the local authority to then, it's almost a reverse tender. We say to them, what's this corridor worth to you? How much will you essentially pay us to then operate on that corridor? Probably more importantly, then it's around the quality element then, because essentially we wouldn't want the money. We want to say, actually, we want you to provide a better, if you're the sole operator on that route, we want you to provide a better service. How would you go about doing that? So it's almost like a quality score that we would be expecting back from the operators to be able to do that. So as part of the next variation of the enhanced partnership, we are looking to implement a number of corridors in the region that have got that maximum frequency placed upon it, and that will then force the operators to operate a level of resource that is matched to the patronage using a methodology that we've agreed, well, semi-agreed with the operators and are taking forward. So it's part of a lot of the sort of the partnership discussions around the next variation of the enhanced partnership developing.
Can I come back, Jen?
Very quickly,
Right, just quickly. School routes we've mentioned, yeah. Now there's a local school route. It's the number 10 Walsall to Brownhills. At school times, it's a normal bus route, but at school times the children use it, and they're putting on a single decker. So that means children are being left at the bus stop and not being able to being late for school. And I'd like to also come back on what you've just said, and I actually welcome what you've just said, because we have 2 routes in Walsall, which we're standing waiting for a bus, great big long queue of people waiting for the bus, and there's these one certain two buses coming in every couple of minutes empty and going out empty. A suggestion on that is put a double decker onto that route, and that would free up a driver to actually be driving the buses that are missing on the other routes. Because it's at every I think they're every 4 or 5 minutes these buses are. You see them trundling in and going out with no passengers on. And that's one of the routes basically one of the routes you just mentioned. So that is a suggestion that could possibly work.
So just on school routes, we'll pick that up with National Express as to why they're putting a single deck on at peak times. There might be operational reasons to that, or there might, I don't know the route of the 10, I'm afraid, but whether there's a low bridge or anything like that that they have to take.
No, it's not.
Into, okay, we'll pick that up with them directly. And then on the partnership routes that you just mentioned, the 2 that are in Walsall, we have just reviewed those both with National Express and Diamond, who operate on those corridors, and we are talking about reducing the number of buses that are on those routes, and then redeploying that resource elsewhere. And that's part of what's being discussed for the those actual changes will be from the 27th of November, but that will release resource to make the network more efficient. Okay.
Just before I bring Councillor Sims in, have you got a separate presentation for paper 7? Because it feels as though, as you've been talking, we've kind of dealt with, we've picked up the issues that are in both papers, because I'm just really mindful of time.
No, Chair, I haven't prepared a separate presentation for BC. It was just going to give an overview around the bus service improvement plan, but that'll be very short for members to pick up any questions and really explain the transition between the 2.
Okay, I think our agenda is different numbering.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Chair. My main concern is obviously with the surveys that have been done already. I do agree with Councillor Waters that maybe a new survey could be done somewhere on the line. Because obviously coming out of COVID, yes, there was less people using the buses. There was empty buses riding about different places. The concern is now, as like Councillor Lars said as well, that a lot of people are working from home. But on certain estates, I know quite a few in my local area that do need a regular bus service. And if these bus services are taken off because of the survey says there's lack of use over the last certain periods of time, there's going to be the elderly and the people who are getting back into work now who need this transport to get to Dudley, Wells or West Bromwich with the connecting buses. So people going to work are going to feel a knock-on effect and being late or having to find alternative transport. And not only that, with the elderly people finding more and more coming out now, obviously because they're feeling a lot more safer. Potentially it's going to be putting them back into isolation if they haven't got their local bus to take them through. If there's a bus running through an area that's running 4 times an hour, maybe instead of taking that bus route off altogether, you could potentially put it to once an hour, so at least residents, whether they're young, old or working, can still get off their estates to get into the towns or cities where they need to be.
So just to reiterate, the data that we've got at the moment is continuous. So we'll know today how many people travelled yesterday. So we have got the most up-to-date patronage information. I think you're right. We do need to. I think we're due another round of sort of the lifestyle type survey to understand a bit more about their habits, and absolutely we'll be doing that. You're absolutely right. One of the considerations that we make when we're tendering the services that aren't commercially viable, are those that are potentially at risk. We've got a number of options if that service falls outside of our value for money criteria, which is what TDC reviewed. One of those is to think about the remapping the service. So if it runs on every half hour, is it cheaper to run it every hour? If it runs 6 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, could we trim that slightly to run 8 till 6 or whatever it might be? So we give it every opportunity to survive and give people a service. The downside of that, though, because it is slightly a last resort, is when you reduce the frequency or trim the day, it becomes less useful for the passengers that are using it, because they might be able to get to school and they or might not be able to get home, or they can get to work and can't get back, and we quickly see a decline in the numbers of people that are using the service, unfortunately. But you're right, it is part of the consideration, and we absolutely do think about it. What I would say is the services that are most at risk as part of this process, we've already undertaken an element of that in previous tender rounds and previous years, so that they really are at the bottom of the pecking order, unfortunately.
Thank you. I'm going to bring next the warning in a moment just to talk about the TDC decision-making process on the access standards. But just for myself, very quickly, it feels to me as though while we operate this pure commercial model, we're always going to have these challenges within the sector. So I suppose my challenge to you is in terms of delivery, quality of delivery, reliability of delivery, encouraging behaviour change. Do we really believe that the current model that we have is delivering that for the residents of the West Midlands? And within that, I'd just like to ask a little bit more about we talked about National Express and some discussions, particularly around the school services and whose responsibility it was to communicate that decision-making process. So how do we hold a company to account as part of the tendering process if actually they're not delivering in the way we have expected them to deliver on a particular item? So if I could get an answer on those two, and then I'll bring Councillor Warren in.
Thank you, Chair. So I think, and this is where it's also does cross over into the item around bus service improvement plans as well, and the importance of those. So I think if we look at the implications of the network that we have, it's clear that the implications of COVID have been a seismic challenge and change for the network. And in the West Midlands, we have a proud heritage and history, I think, within the bus system of trying to work very collaboratively in partnership with our bus operators to try and effect the best outcomes for the residents of the region, and that's a historical thing that we can refer back to how we built that over the course of probably 10-15 years in the region to support the outcomes. I think what we've also seen is, just to pick up on your points around the questions of how we deliver in that regard. So throughout COVID government launched a national bus strategy. The national bus strategy was then supported by a called Bus Back Better, really aligned with our regional vision for bus and in terms of delivering change for people and for the residents of the West Midlands through buses. We know how essential buses are to the region. They carry 8 out of 10 public transport journeys. So 80% of people that use public transport, they are bus journeys. So it's absolutely critical and essential, and it's the backbone of our public transport system and partly of our wider transport system. So we know how important that is. And actually here, we have a relationship with a major bus operator and some smaller bus operators. But some of the challenges that have been thrown up in this space have probably been about what is now the lack of competition in that arena and the impacts that has on us. So the future risks, and I know that Steve's been looking at some work around future costs of providing services. You know, we've seen that cost escalation in the delivery of services. So actually, how do we suppress that? Well, if you've got a deregulated competitive market, we need competition to be able to make that work if that's the case. So I think that's presented us with some new challenges. And of course, that quality of delivery also includes having enough drivers. But we know from what we've said, this isn't just a regional problem, that's a national and international problem. So it requires big thinking and big solutions. And of course, here we are at a time when it's not just, as I say to many in the room, we had a Bus Alliance Board. If this had been a problem to the scale that we have, that have been outside of the period of COVID recovery, it probably would have been significant enough for us to make a conversation within the Houses of Parliament or somebody stand up at a dispatch box, a national crisis of shortage of bus drivers. But actually what we're witnessing is the same crisis that's going on across health, across education, across other sectors. But the impact for bus customers is if their bus doesn't turn up, then it's gone, it doesn't arrive. So we have to find the fixes, but at the same time as everybody else is trying to find fixes for their unique problems to all of their industries. So having said all of that, the government require us through the Bus Back Better to deliver an enhanced partnership, but actually in this region, we were already doing that. So we were already working with an enhanced partnership for our sprint corridors. We've evolved that, and actually just this week, Sandwell as an authority have just approved and made the last authority to do so. So has approved the enhanced partnership, which now means that we have made the enhanced partnership, which gives us the ability to go back to government and free up the £87 million worth of funding to try and bring in some of the improvements. But in terms of how that should now be the mechanism for us to be able to hold our operating base to account for delivery and improvements and targets. And some of those improvement targets that are in there include the benefits to customers around the simplification of services and ticketing from 2023. We're hoping that by Easter 2023, we have simplified what we're calling the bonfire bus tickets that was referred to. That will mean that there will be one price ticket for all customers across the region, trying to make buses easier and simpler to use. Promotion of incentives, so we can give free bus travel to some of those harder to reach groups and communities to try and encourage more return, quicker and more return to make the network sustainable. Working with the operators to improve their drivers. Also a customer charter, which is designed to be absorbed, promoted by the Transport Authority, but undertaken by all of the operators. So getting agreement that we have one set customer charter of the expected standard for customers across the region as well. And also we're putting in there services around performance management for bus operators, our expectation of the percentage of services that will run reliably and predictably, which also brings in the need for us to make sure that we have reliable and predictable journeys through bus priority as well across the region, which was referred to earlier. So there is a part to play there for local authorities in that. With all of those in place, what we should be able to do is hold our operators to account to deliver on the services that our residents and we expect, but also through the framework of saying, well, this is through partnership delivery, but if this cannot and does not deliver, the region still does have options, and those options, I suppose, form in fact for the work that we're evaluating under the full franchising assessment, which I know is coming to a future scrutiny committee in January. I think my word of caution, if I'm clear though at the moment, is that whilst we are undertaking that, and they are the if you like, the mechanisms by which we work, we have within the West Midlands, we have a bus alliance, and we have a bus alliance board, and we have a structure of governance around that, and we have a transport delivery committee to hold our operators to account. What we should be now looking at doing is, with all of this change in structure of funding, of regulation, is making sure that that bus alliance board is holding all of its partners to account to deliver, and we're really clear on what good looks like, and then that we're also really clear on what our alternative options are and how we might undertake those and go down those routes. The caution part comes in the fact that at the moment what we are faced with, in my view, is a crisis of funding in the bus network, and that is not just about providing additional government funds. That is also about what is the long-term structure of funding the bus network, because if you take this back to its rawest form and you ask yourself, what is the government accountable for delivering in terms of bus services? And the answer is they're not. They're accountable for delivering free passes and making free passes available for certain things, but they're not accountable for the delivery. If you go then to the local transport authorities, then what are they accountable for delivering? Well, actually, all they're accountable for delivering is filling in the gaps that aren't provided commercially. And that is the responsibility of this authority. If you then go to the bus operator and say, what is their requirement for delivery? Well, there is none. So when National Express say to me, you know, well, we could have taken an approach as other operators have in other parts of the country and cut services faster and deeper, they're quite right. They could have done that. And they've taken an option not to, and to work with us to try and protect the network. And it's really important that we recognise that, because that's actually utilising the relationships that we've built from the partnerships and the approach of collaboration, rather than seeing an independent business just work to restore its commercial margins in a way that would have seen us have a lot more disastrous impacts to our network come January. But those threats aren't over, and those risks aren't over, and we haven't got to the bottom of that. And so I think that the issue that we have is that what we have is not sustainable. And actually we need to understand what is the best mechanism to make that sustainable. And that may come in the form of what we've outlined with the BSIP and the enhanced partnership. But actually this probably does need greater thinking and greater assessment of how do we make sure that if costs for operators to provide services are going up so significantly, the risk we face now is that some people might catch a bus in the morning in Solihull or Walsall or Dudley or Sandwell or wherever, and sit on a bus where they think, well, I'm on a relatively full bus, this must be safe. That's not necessarily the case in the world that we live in at the moment. That bus isn't necessarily safe because 15 or 20 people are sat on it at peak time. Overall, the service may not still be making money. So that is going to require some wider thinking, some wider scope, and that's the message that we're trying to get to government as well.
Thanks, Pete. That was a really helpful explanation. Thank you. Martin, I'm just going to bring Councillor Worrell in first, because we are running desperately short of time now. So apologies for that on my behalf. Councillor Worrell.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, TDC did obviously consider that report and agreed the recommendations as set out. It was cross-party, unanimous. The point I've got to make is it goes back to when John Hayes came to Walsall and spoke to Scrutiny Committee and described January as a cliff edge and then another cliff edge in March, and we cannot go on like this. The key to this is funding, and actually, like it or not, if the government believes in a viable public transport network, it's got to provide the support. It's as simple as that, as far as I'm concerned, and it needs to be medium and longer term. And I think, did we certainly, I think it's in the minutes that would go forward to the Combined Authority when they meet on the 16th of December. On Councillor Waters' point, on concessionary travel, I really do think that Transport for West Midlands could do with an active promotion to encourage people. It's difficult because of the shakiness of the network, but I think we've got to do that to really encourage people back, because the absence of 100% return is really quite very important, just from our point of view, but also from the citizens' point of view, the disabled citizens. The glad to hear about Sandwell finally taking their decision, so that's good. Bus Alliance, David Bradford, the Chief Executive of National Express, said that he felt that the schools issue was the notion of withdrawing school services was mistaken, and he didn't advise his colleagues appropriately. But now he's kind of saying that, well, some of them will go, which is a bit contradictory because that was only last Wednesday. Things move, don't they? Yeah, I mean, I don't mind survey information, but I'm really conscious of the huge burden of time on Pete and John and Steve and all colleagues involved with the current very short timescales. And don't you really think that all of this is dictated by commercial decisions? As Pete says, the operators can do whatever they like. They can register or deregister whatever they want. And it's, again, back to the finance. It's about our ability to fill whatever gaps, which then leads on to your point, Chair. I think the position with franchising is, even if it happens, it's not a quick option, and we've got to make the best of what we got at the moment. But I do think that it needs a good hard look at to see whether longer term that can assure our citizens of a full, proper network of bus services. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much. Now, I'm really aware that we've still got 3 papers to hear. So it's now 11:15. Martin, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to take your question on that item, but it might come into Pete's presentation on the BC. So if you want to just hold on to it, and then if you want to ask Pete if it fits in with the BC presentation, by all means ask it at that point. Pete, can I ask you to be as brief as you can be on the next 2 items?
Well, I can probably be very brief, Chair, because I think in actual fact, what's happening, these were provided as background papers to support the wider discussion. So apologies if that looks like it's designed to be completely separate. They were provided so that the committee had got an overview of all of those collective papers that were visible to TDC in order to A, make that decision, and B, assess their approval of the enhanced partnership for the bus service improvement plan, which of course has now gone through. The only thing I was going to set out further around the enhanced partnership plan is that actually now that is made, as I'd said before, our task now is to work with government to release the funding out to us. So this is separate now to funding for the network and actually providing services. This is the 88 million that is around the transformation of our network and to be able to support some of the transformational elements, some of which I've already set out to the committee anyway. I think the only things I wanted to advise that are really important to the EP and the wider report on it that was received by Transport Delivery Committee and their decision to support the EP is the fact that not only does this free up the 88 million that enables us to do that customer incentive programme, but also the additional services on the network and also the fares freeze. So remember that we have a fares freeze in the region supported by the operators already started, and that's on its way through. Can
I just ask people on screen to just mute themselves, please? We've got a bit of feedback. Martin, can I just ask you to mute yourself, please, because we've got some feedback from your. Thank you very much, please.
Not only does that the fares freeze has already commenced and is designed to run until 2025. It's actually really important because that will aid some of the recovery and passenger recovery. But the links across from the EP and the BSIP to the CRSDS, the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, and some of the critical elements in that, which are around cross-city bus delivery. So actually freeing up, improving some of the journey times as referred to by Councillor Waters earlier on. And there's a £60 million investment programme in there to try and make a lot of the journeys more reliable and faster. That will be a real help to sustain the future of the bus network that we recognise today. And I think as well, there's also the additional funds supported by the Black Country authorities in their multimodal corridors. So there's and demand responsive transport pilots as well. There are several elements within CRSTS that will also help support the delivery of the enhanced partnership, because they're made reference to within the reports. So Chair, I'm happy to leave it there because the rest is background information.
Thanks, Martin. At that point then, do you want to come in with your additional question?
Yes, I do, Chair. The question was just coming back to the shortage of drivers very quickly. And it was mentioned to be an international and national problem. What consideration has been given to the introduction of autonomous services? As we know, we do have some buses on public roads being tested.
Yes, well, actually, and we're talking about the international updates from colleagues on that. There are some autonomous pilots going on in certain cities and regions around Europe, but closer to home, there are proposals looking at autonomous pilots here in the West Midlands for smaller vehicles as well, which are being led through the Future Mobility Zone programme within Transport for West Midlands, working very collaboratively with Coventry and Solihull particularly. So there are some pilots, but also we're monitoring some of the pilots with colleagues from bus operators owners and bus manufacturers across Europe currently. I do think, though, that in terms of the time scale for wider rollout for those, we're not looking at any immediate proposals that would solve any of our current challenges around driver shortages, but there's absolutely an aspiration for road vehicle use in the medium term future.
And the very, if I could just come back quickly, the one good thing that well, it's a bad thing that's almost a good thing about the sort of all hands to the pump approach that people have been using to get buses moving, using people whose primary role isn't drivers. I think the fact we try to attract people just to be bus drivers and do nothing else day in, day out could be a demotivator for some potential applicants. Perhaps we should consider giving some people the opportunity for a more varied career from month to month.
Yeah, indeed, that's a good point. I'm probably the wrong person to say that to, because the best part of my career was spending my years being out bus driving. So I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of it. So I'm probably not the best person to advise that one too. But I absolutely take your point, Councillor. And actually, that's something that I think some of the staff within National Express, conversely, quite enjoy. That having the other way around, where they work in an office-based role but have the opportunity to go out and do some of those roles. But yes, I take your point on that. That's a point that we can make to the operators too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, good idea. If you've still got your licence.
Yes, and when the bus don't turn up, I'm going to give you the call. All right, can you drive it for me?
The number 10 to Brown.
Yes.
Thanks everybody for your contributions on that. I think to have agreement that we endorse the reports and the progress.
Yep.
I think I would like to stress though that and it goes back to Councillor Worrell's comments about the real importance of making sure that we give real a good look at franchising in terms of the work that we're doing on that, because it's clear to me that the model that we currently have is presenting challenges, and if we can't find a satisfactory way forward, we have to look at alternatives. And secondly, Councillor Worrell's other point around pushing government on funding, because he's quite right, whatever we look for, whatever model we have, without adequate funding, none of it's going to work. So, you know, really getting the combined authority to get behind that messaging to government and to make that really clear to them. Just to add, we have item 11, which is item of private business excluding press and public. So if you don't mind waiting on for that, is that okay? I mean, anybody else who wants to leave, that's fine, but we just have that one item right at the end, which I don't think will take too long. So I'm going to hand over now to Graham Jones, who is on screen to present the Commonwealth Games report. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. You have a report before you, which is around lessons learnt for the Commonwealth Games. Perhaps just to introduce it, the Games finished probably just over 3 months ago now. It seems quite a distant memory to some, but it's, I think, was heralded as a success from a transport perspective. We moved over 1.5 million spectators and visitors in the region, and we dealt with various industrial action on the rail network. We planned it during COVID, and so we planned it to compress timescales. The feedback we're getting via spectator surveys is extremely positive. 4 in 5 people put their journey down as good or very good. 54% of people use public transport. And just to the bus items before, it's fair to say that the main workhorse in terms of moving people was the bus network and the bus systems that we put in place for the Games. There's some figures and highlights in the report under item 3, which I think are interesting reading. I won't go into that in any detail. It's there to be seen. The Combined Authority put together the Games Transport Plan We had 5 basic core principles around clean and green public transport games, it being safe and secure, that we minimise disruption, that we gave long-term benefits, and we provided access for all. And I feel we met those principles in most cases, and most journeys were deemed to be very good. All good, and people enjoyed the games. It gave a real buzz to the city and a real buzz to the region. In terms of lessons learned, there's many and various. We've picked out a few in the report. I think the top one, which comes with this games, and I think with any other big event of this sort, is that no one agency delivers a successful transport operation. It comes from working together in a collaborative way. It comes with working with partners and with operators and with suppliers. And the more you can do that, and the more you can develop those collaborative partnerships, the better your delivery will be. Integration of the planning through the planning stage was really important. And also operating the Regional Transport Coordination Centre in a sort of surge capacity with more agencies, more people and more capability in there, served to allow us to respond to anything that was thrown at us during the games operation itself. We had fire that closed the games route network. We had floods that closed the games route network at times, but the RTCC coped really well with responding to those incidents and activities and making sure the network kept moving. Perhaps stop there and take questions. There is a detailed monitoring and evaluation piece being carried out by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, DCMS, and that's going to extend for 5 years beyond the games. We've done our own spectator and passenger surveys, and those were very positive. We're receiving a lot of accolades from within the industry, awards and trophies and such like, which is all very nice. But I think the lasting legacy comes now from one, the schemes that were put in place, 2, the relationships and collaboration that was established, and 3, from the fact that the games overall underspent, and a good body of monies are being retained for legacy projects within the region, not specifically transport, but more generally. But perhaps particularly if you're short of time, I'll stop there and take questions if that's okay.
Thanks very much, Graham. I mean, I think from a user perspective, the ticketing across, being able to use your entrance ticket across any mode of public transport was out. People really, really valued that. That made a big difference to their experience. And having done it myself, it was completely seamless. Really, after the previous conversations we've just had about difficulties, actually what was provided during the Commonwealth Games, I think, was a really good demonstration of how seamless change of modal transport can and should work. So, all credit to everybody who was involved in that. I'll open it up for questions from the committee. No, I'm not seeing any questions. I would like, Martin.
Just a quick one, coming back to my original comments. What kind of reliability figures did you get for the buses that we brought in? Are they comparable to buses in service in Birmingham normally, or better or worse?
Well, it's a very difficult comparison to make, because we put on bespoke shuttle buses for the park and ride sites, for the city centre shuttles, etc. We did have some difficulties with the provider, certainly in the first couple of 3 days. And that is actually a feature of events of this sort, is that you go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in the space of 24 hours, and there's always some teething problems in the first day or 2. So I think in the first day or two that there were some issues. I don't think anybody missed their event or was delayed. But behind the scenes, there was quite a bit of activity going on to try and make sure that we'd got the right buses and the right drivers in the right place at the right time. But in terms of reliability of the network, and which obviously helps the reliability of the bus services, I think it was actually extremely good. We worked closely with the urban traffic control systems in Coventry and in Birmingham to make sure that there was as much priority as possible given to the shuttle bus routes, the Gaines route network, etc., to keep the network as reliable as possible. There's always the incidents, like I say, there was a fire on the A34 that closed it for 24 hours. There was a flood on the road through Warwickshire by the road cycle race, the A46. But those are normal incidents, unfortunately, that always occur from time to time on the network. So personally, I think the network ran well, the system ran well. How it compared to business as usual, the day job, I think I'd probably have to look to Pete a little bit to tell me whether there was a difference. But I think it was very positive because we put priority into particular routes, and that helped enormously to make sure that those journeys on those routes were reliable. We did spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we balanced that across the network. So one of the key tenets of the Games Transport Plan was to keep the region moving as well as the games moving, and I think we achieved that.
Yeah, thank you to everyone involved for a job well done.
Thank you.
Just to add to Graham's point, Chair, I think overall from our perspective, firstly, we saw generally, you would say probably better overall reliability and service management. But I think we also need to caveat that with, I mean, this is once in a generation regional opportunity. Was supported, both John and myself spent time in the RTCC, which was hugely packed out with all the right people doing the right things. We'd got people within each of the local authorities and all of the emergency services on standby to make sure all of those things worked for those events. So I think actually what we need to do as best we can is take some of that learning experience and recognise some of those support arrangements that need to be in place to keep a good, effective day-to-day bus network operating. And I think going back to the earlier conversation, some of the challenges that we experience in the bus network is actually some of those roles and responsibilities are some of the things that over the years have been stripped out to ensure that we're more efficient with costs and activities. So I think it's a really good opportunity to look against that and say, well, actually, what are those things that we need to additionally support behind the scenes to make an effective bus network work on a day-to-day basis, as well as it did throughout the Commonwealth Games.
Just bringing Councillor Worrell and then come to yourself. Councillor Worrell.
Yes, my experience was really A34, Walsall to Sandwell and Birmingham, but above all Perry Bar. And I just wanted to say that I could not imagine that everything would have been got ready in time. It just was, and I think that was an amazing achievement at One Stop and Perry Bar Station in particular. So thanks to all concerned.
That's the law.
Thanks, Steve. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the driver and bus operators who helped us to make our Commonwealth Games success. But going back to our earlier report, where we recognise the story of drivers. So I'd like to know where we put these drivers in and the operators in. Did it have any adverse impact on the area they come from? And if the drivers from other operators can come to our area to help us out, I was wondering if any of them would like to come back at permanent job in our area. And what can hope to encourage them to take up a job in our area.
Well, I'm not sure about that, but hopefully if they like the look of Birmingham and enjoyed their experience, perhaps they might consider relocating. I don't know. In terms of the impact in other areas, I mean, we're confident it didn't impact upon operations in the rest of the West Midlands. The drivers came from all over the country, from Scotland, from Cornwall, from London, and their operations and their roles will have been backfilled to some extent locally. It was also during the summer holidays, of course, when perhaps there's more availability of drivers in that period. We've no reports of any adverse influence elsewhere in the country. But again, I don't, Pete, if you've picked anything up, but I certainly haven't picked up any notion that we stripped out service levels in other parts of the country.
We saw some local reports in some local press in other parts of the country, but nothing that was significant to our impact or came directly to us. I think actually those, the operators had to use a whole multitude of tools in their armory around holiday rotas, around drafting people in. I certainly spoke to one of the guys doing the support for queue management and queue busting at one of the park and ride sites. When I asked him, how long he'd been working for Stagecoach, and he sort of said to me, no, I don't. He said, my dad does, and he's made me come here for a fortnight. So, so I think they used all the tools in their armory to make sure that everything was as supported both here and back at home as they could.
Thanks. I've just got one quick question for you, and that's about the commitment at the outset around the cleanest, greenest games.
Yeah.
Obviously, public transport is a major contributor to that. Accepting that we had to draft additional resourcing because of the issue around industrial action on the trains, do we believe that the way we delivered public transport did mean that this was the cleanest, greenest games that has been delivered?
So the narrative around that changed a little bit as we moved towards the games, towards the games being the greenest games ever. Oh, sorry, the greenest games yet, because you never know what's going to come beyond, and also a carbon neutral legacy. So clearly there was expenditure of carbon significantly for the games, and spectator transport was predicted, and I think the post games analysis shows to be something around 54% of the total carbon footprint for the games. So all of the efforts that we put in to improve active travel and provide free access to the West Midlands cycle hire, all of the efforts we put in for free public transport and to move as many people as possible by public transport will have contributed to a reduction in the carbon footprint of the games. There is a very comprehensive report now been produced by the organising committee that came out last week, which I think would be worth the committee being aware of, which sets out the views on the green credentials of the games. And I think it's almost impossible to say that it was the greenest games yet, but it certainly set the tone for future games. There was a lot of things done for this games which will be taken forward as lessons learned into future games, and they're all in the organising committee's outturn report. And a legacy, the carbon neutral legacy will be achieved by tree planting for 2,022 acres of forest that's going in, which is committed to be completed by the end of 2024. So I can't give you a figure that says this was compared to, say, Glasgow games or the Gold Coast games, that this was less carbon footprint than there, because there isn't a comparative figure. But we certainly feel, and the organising committee certainly feel, that we made steps forwards for an event of this sort in terms of our commitment to carbon neutrality and to create a legacy of a carbon neutral legacy out of the games. So it's a bit of a, can't be definitive about it, but it's there's definitely was significant benefits gained this time around. 42% of the game's fleet, for instance, was low emission vehicles. A lot of people use the free public transport. A lot of people use the free cycle hire, and efforts were made to try and reduce the amount of carbon expended in all parts of the games, not just transport.
Thanks very much for that. And I would be interested in having a look at the organising committee's report. That I think would provide some useful reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I mean, just we don't need to make any decisions on this. This was just for information. But I think just just to really sum up that everybody has been really impressed with the way this was delivered. So absolutely excellent on everybody's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the work programme, item 10, which you have all seen in your packs. Just to note that for January, we have the Wednesbury to Briley Hill Metro Extension funding coming again. That's a piece of pre-decision scrutiny. It may well be in private session, I think, because it won't have gone to the board, which the board meeting is the day after. We still are unsure. We have it in our programme, the Transport Governance Review, to come on the 12th of January. That is still the plan. I should know more after the agenda briefing session on the 19th with the lead for governance, if there's any change to that plan. And then just to note the question time, which will be the 16th of February, and again we will have Councillor Warren in attendance for that session. Any questions on the forward plan? No? Okay, lovely, thank you very much. Well, that moves us then on to the item of private business. I don't think there's anybody that I need to exclude in the room for this. So